The first thing I remember was the strobe of red and blue bouncing across the shutters of our two-story colonial. The sirens cut off abruptly, leaving only the hum of idling engines and the sudden silence of a neighborhood holding its breath. Two squad cars rolled to a stop in front of my driveway. On the other side of the street, bathed in the flashing lights, Karen stood in her silk robe, arms folded like a queen about to witness an execution. Her smirk was the kind of smile you save for a victory lap. My stomach tightened. She had actually done it. She had called the cops on us. Phones glowed in upstairs windows, blinds tilted just enough for nosy eyes to peek through. I could hear the soft shuffle of slippers on sidewalks as a couple of neighbors drifted closer, pretending to walk their dogs. The air carried the faint smell of fertilizer from a freshly mown lawn, mixed with the metallic tang of exhaust fumes. And me? I was frozen at the door, heart pounding, watching two uniformed officers approach like grim messengers. That was the night the HOA drama reached its fever pitch. But to make sense of this circus, you have to rewind to where it all began. A clipboard, a parking spot, and Karen's insatiable need for control. 3 weeks earlier, it had been an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I came home to find a folded slip of paper wedged beneath my windshield wiper, an HOA compliance notice. Unauthorized overnight parking in common area. Vehicles subject to tow under Section 8.4C of the Mulberry Lane HOA bylaws. That was the official language. Neat, clinical. But I didn't need to read the fine print to know who wrote it. Karen's handwriting was as sharp and unforgiving as the woman herself, looping K's that practically stabbed through the paper. My crime? Parking my truck along the curb in front of my own house, something I had done dozens of times before without issue. But lately, Karen had a new obsession: parking. Now, most HMBs regulate street parking for safety, sure. Fire lanes need to be clear, and no one likes a car graveyard. But Section 8.4C had always been loosely enforced, more guideline than law, until Karen got her hands on it. She had recently been elected HOA president, a position she treated less like a volunteer duty and more like a coronation. Overnight, Mulberry Lane turned into her personal kingdom, and her clipboard, that was her sword. At first, I brushed it off, a petty warning, a power trip. But then the letters escalated. Every week, new violations arrived in my mailbox, each one more absurd than the last. Grass too tall, trash cans visible from the curb, a garden hose left coiled in the wrong direction. She even cited us once for having a non-conforming mailbox flag. I didn't even know mailbox flags had a conformity standard. One evening, I confronted her at the community pool. She was perched in a lounge chair, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, clipboard balanced on her lap like it was an extension of her body. "Karen," I said, holding up the latest violation letter, "this is ridiculous. A mailbox flag? Really?" She lowered her sunglasses just enough to meet my gaze. Her lipstick was the shade of fresh blood. "Rules are rules," she replied smoothly. "If we don't enforce them, the whole neighborhood falls apart. Property values plummet. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Her voice dripped with a kind of smug righteousness, the way someone might recite scripture. "Enforcement isn't the problem, it's targeting. We both know half the block leaves their trash cans out all week. You're not citing them." She leaned forward, red nails tapping her clipboard. "Maybe they're not the ones I'm watching." That sentence lingered in the humid evening air like smoke from a fire you couldn't quite see. From that day, it felt like Karen had a spotlight trained on my family. My wife Emily bore the brunt of it. Karen approached her at the mailboxes with veiled threats, muttering about people who think they're above the law. Once, Emily found Karen standing across the street in the middle of the night, jotting notes by flashlight, as if our yard was a crime scene. When we asked the board for help, the other members deflected. Karen controlled the agenda, the minutes, even the email listserv. She was the HOA, and she knew it. Then came the accusation that pushed everything over the edge. One muggy Saturday morning, Karen stormed onto our driveway when Emily was unloading groceries. Her robe flapped like a cape, her hair disheveled, but her eyes sharp. She jabbed a finger at Emily's badge clipped to her work bag. "That," she hissed, "is a felony." Emily blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "Impersonating an officer. Federal, no less. I know fake when I see it." Karen's voice was loud enough for 3 neighbors trimming hedges to stop and stare. Emily calmly replied, "Karen, this is my job. I don't have to explain it to you." But Karen wasn't interested in explanations. She wanted a scene. "We'll see what the police have to say about that," she screeched, spinning on her heel and storming back across the street. And for the first time, I realized Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was dangerous. For the next week, tension buzzed through Mulberry Lane like static before a storm. Karen doubled down, firing off emails to the HOA listserv accusing us of security risks and misrepresentation of federal authority. She CC'd half the neighborhood, bolding certain words for dramatic effect. Some neighbors ignored her. Some whispered their support to us, but no one publicly stood against her. Fear worked better than loyalty in Karen's kingdom. And then, one evening, it happened. The knock at the door. The red and blue lights painting shadows across my living room. Emily and I exchanged a look, part fear, part fury. As I opened the door, one officer adjusted his belt, expression unreadable. The other glanced at a clipboard of his own. "Sir, we received a report about impersonation of a federal officer." My mouth dried. Behind them, across the street, Karen watched with the satisfaction of a cat about to devour a mouse. I could feel the eyes of the entire block drilling into my back as I stepped onto the porch. My pulse raced. Emily stood beside me, chin raised, her badge glinting faintly under the porch light. One of the officers caught sight of it and hesitated. His eyes flicked from the badge to Emily's face, then back again. The tension in that silence could have cracked concrete. And Karen? Her smirk faltered, just barely, but enough for me to notice. That night wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Because if Karen thought a single false report would scare us into silence, she had no idea who she was dealing with. But the question was, how far was she willing to go to keep control of Mulberry Lane, and how far were we willing to go to stop her?
Effective immediately, all vehicles parked on Mulberry Lane must be registered with the HOA and display a parking decal. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at the owner's expense. That was the sentence that sent shockwaves through our neighborhood. Not from a city ordinance, not from law enforcement, but from a 3-page compliance notice written, printed, and distributed by Karen herself. I still remember holding that notice in my hands, the paper hot from the summer sun, the ink smudging where her red nails must have pressed. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, official, final, unquestionable. She had written it like a judge delivering a sentence, and judging by the looks on my neighbors' faces as they checked their mailboxes, everyone else felt the same chill. You know the kind of silence that falls when something outrageous happens, but nobody dares to speak up? That was Mulberry Lane that afternoon. Sprinklers clicked in perfect rhythm, cicadas screamed from the oaks, but no one said a word. We all knew what it meant. Karen wasn't just enforcing the rules anymore. She was inventing them. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just another petty nuisance, another weekend wasted trying to decode legalese Karen had copy-pasted from some outdated HOA manual. But then, I spotted the line at the bottom of the notice. Failure to comply may result in daily fines of up to $50 per violation, assessed directly to the homeowner's account. My stomach turned. That wasn't just bluster. That was money, real enforceable money. Most HOAs operate under a covenant, a set of bylaws that owners agree to when they buy property. They can't just make up rules out of thin air. But Karen, she knew the game. She knew that most people never actually read the covenants, never studied the fine print. She knew fear of fines was often enough to shut people up. And so, for all intents and purposes, her notice had teeth. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I spotted Karen strutting down the street with her leather-bound HOA binder tucked under her arm. Her robe had been replaced by a pressed floral blouse, but the same smug satisfaction radiated off her. She stopped at each driveway, clipboard ready, like a general inspecting her troops. Every car, every garden gnome, every blade of grass, nothing escaped her gaze. I tried to ignore it, but the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement followed me like a metronome of control. And then, inevitably, she stopped at my house. "Evening," I called out, forcing a polite smile. Karen tilted her head, pen poised over paper. "Your truck still doesn't have a decal." "Karen, the decals don't exist yet. You just sent the notice this morning." She smiled, lips painted the color of ripe cherries. "And yet, rules are rules. You'll want to get on top of that. I'd hate to start a paper trail on you." The way she said it, casual but cutting, felt less like a neighborly reminder and more like a threat. And it wasn't just me she targeted. By the end of that week, I heard she'd cited the Thompsons for a faded lawn ornament, fined the Delgados for excessive use of holiday lights, and sent a formal warning to an elderly widow for leaving her recycling bin at the curb for longer than 12 hours. It was martial law, suburbia style. The breaking point came at the next HOA board meeting. Normally, these meetings were sleepy affairs, half empty, donuts going stale on the folding table, minutes read aloud in a monotone. But that night, the rec center was packed. People crammed into folding chairs, arms crossed, eyes darting toward Karen, like they were waiting for a sermon. And she sat at the head of the long table, gavel in hand, binder stacked with papers. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who believed she was the law. "Effective this quarter," she declared, tapping the gavel, "all compliance notices will be enforced without exception. No grandfathering, no excuses. We are restoring order to Mulberry Lane." Murmurs rippled through the room. A man in the back whispered something about power trip, and his wife quickly shushed him. I leaned over to Emily and muttered, "This is insane. She can't just rewrite the rules." But Karen anticipated the resistance. She pulled out a stack of highlighted bylaws and began reading. Section 5.2 grants the board authority to establish reasonable procedures for maintaining community standards. Section 7.4 outlines enforcement mechanisms, including fines. Section 9.1 affirms the board's right to interpret these rules in the best interest of the community. It was masterful, in its own twisted way. She cherry-picked clauses, weaponized vague language, and wielded it like a blade. And the truth is, she wasn't entirely wrong. The covenants were written broadly enough that someone like her could twist them to justify almost anything. At one point, I raised my hand. "Karen, with all due respect, none of this went through a vote. Aren't homeowners supposed to approve amendments before they take effect?" Her eyes locked on me, icy and unblinking. "This isn't an amendment. This is enforcement. There's a difference." Gasps and whispers filled the room. And just like that, the discussion was over. The gavel came down, decision made. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors shuffled out quietly, some casting me sympathetic glances, but saying nothing. Karen lingered, her red nails drumming against the table as she watched me pack up. When I finally looked her way, she smiled, that same infuriating smile. "You're not going to win this one, Daryl. You'll pay your fines like everyone else," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. That night, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, HOA notices spread out like crime scene evidence. "She's targeting us," Emily said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. I nodded. "And if we don't push back, she'll bleed us dry one violation at a time." The next morning, the first fine arrived. $50 posted directly to our HOA account for unauthorized overnight parking. My truck, the same truck I'd parked in the same spot for years. I appealed, of course, sent a letter citing the actual bylaws, requested a hearing, but guess who chaired the hearing committee? Karen. 3 board members sat at a folding table, Karen in the center like a judge, jury, and executioner. She read my appeal aloud with exaggerated boredom and then announced, "Appeal denied." Gavel, done. It was in that moment I realized something chilling. The system wasn't broken. It was rigged. Rigged in Karen's favor, and she knew exactly how to keep it that way. Driving home from that sham of a hearing, I caught sight of Karen standing at the corner of Mulberry Lane, clipboard in hand, writing something down as a neighbor's kid chalked on the sidewalk. She looked up, met my eyes, and gave the faintest nod, like a warden acknowledging her prisoner. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about fines, or cars, or mailbox flags. This was about domination. About Karen cementing herself as queen of Mulberry Lane, untouchable, unquestioned. And unless someone stopped her, she wasn't going to stop at decals and trash cans. What I didn't know yet was how far she'd go or how far we'd have to go to fight back, because the next escalation was coming, and it was going to make fines look like child's play.
"You can't hide forever. I know who you really are." That's what Karen hissed at my wife on that humid Thursday evening, the kind of night when the air feels like it's pressing against your skin, and even the cicadas fall quiet for drama. Emily had just pulled our mail from the communal boxes at the end of the street. Karen appeared from the shadows like she'd been waiting, robe cinched tight, hair frizzed from the damp heat, eyes glittering with self-righteous suspicion. For a split second, Emily thought Karen might actually lunge. Instead, Karen leaned in, her perfume cloying and heavy, and whispered those words like she was narrating a true crime exposé. And me? I watched from the sidework, frozen, one grocery bag cutting into my palm as the eggs inside slowly warmed. That was the exact moment I realized Karen's campaign against us wasn't just about citations or fines. It was personal. She wasn't trying to protect property values. She was trying to destroy us. Here's the part you won't believe. My wife's badge wasn't fake. It wasn't some novelty ID from a flea market or a movie prop. It was real. Issued by a federal agency I won't name here for obvious reasons. She carried it discreetly, clipped inside her bag, not to flash at neighbors, but because it was part of her job. And Karen, in her paranoid spiral, had convinced herself that Emily was faking it. That paranoia became her new obsession. The first sign was the notes. Folded, anonymous slips slipped under our doormat, typed in Times New Roman like a ransom letter from someone with Microsoft Word. "We know you're not who you say you are. Faking credentials is a crime. The truth will come out." They weren't signed, of course, but the paper smelled faintly of Karen's rose hand lotion, the same kind she left a trail of at HOA meetings. Then came the late-night stakeouts. At first, I thought it was coincidence, the same shadowy figure pacing across the street when I took the trash out after midnight. But one evening, I snapped on our porch light and caught her outright. Karen crouched behind a hydrangea bush with a notepad, jotting furiously as though our recycling bins contained classified intelligence. "Enjoying the view?" I called out. She straightened, eyes wide, but quickly composed herself. Just making sure residents are following protocol. Your bins were out too early last week." "Karen," I said flatly, "it's 11:30 at night." She sniffed, unbothered. "Rules don't sleep." And with that, she marched off, heels clicking like the exclamation point on a deranged sentence. By then, Emily had had enough. "This is harassment," she said one morning, sipping coffee as we sat at the kitchen table with another violation letter spread between us. "She's crossing lines the HOA isn't even authorized to cross." She was right. HOAs can fine you, sure. They can send notices, call hearings, place liens if you rack up unpaid dues. But they cannot, under any legal stretch, stalk residents at night or interrogate them about their employment. Karen was coloring outside the lines, and she knew it. But she also knew most neighbors wouldn't challenge her. The paranoia reached new heights when Karen began spreading rumors. At the next HOA meeting, slipped into the standard agenda of lawn care reminders and budget reports, she made a chilling announcement. "We've received anonymous concerns about a resident impersonating federal authority. I take these matters very seriously. Our community's safety comes first." Gasps, whispers, eyes darting toward us. She hadn't said Emily's name, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. I raised my hand. "Point of order. Anonymous complaints aren't valid under Section 6.3 of the bylaws. The board can't act on them without evidence." Karen smiled thinly. "Thank you for your input. Duly noted." And then she moved on to the landscaping budget as though she hadn't lobbed a grenade into the room. Afterwards, neighbors approached us in hushed tones. Some offered sympathy, others skepticism. "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. She wouldn't say that without proof, right?" The seed of doubt had been planted, and that was all Karen needed. Then came the anonymous tips, reaching beyond the HOA. Twice, uniformed officers knocked on our door, sheepishly explaining they'd received calls about a suspicious individual flashing a badge near the mailboxes. Both times, the officers left embarrassed after Emily calmly presented her credentials. Both times, Karen watched from her porch, arms crossed, lips curved in that smug smile. One night, Emily confronted her directly. "Karen, you need to stop. You're making false reports. That's a crime." Karen leaned against her porch railing, bathed in the warm glow of her tacky solar lights. "If you're real, you have nothing to worry about. If you're not, well, justice has a way of catching up." Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes were steel. That was the first time I saw real danger in her expression. Not just petty annoyance, but conviction. She believed she was the hero of this story, exposing fraud, saving Mulberry Lane from infiltrators, and that made her unstoppable. Meanwhile, the board began to splinter. One member, an older man named Frank, pulled me aside after a meeting. "Listen," he muttered, "between you and me, this is going too far. We never authorized Karen to investigate residents. She's freelancing." "Then stop her," I said. He sighed. "You don't understand. She controls the proxy votes. Half the people here don't even attend meetings. She fills out their ballots, runs the agenda, controls the mailing list. She is the HOA." It was a chilling realization. Karen wasn't just misusing her power. She had built a system to protect it. Still, cracks were forming. Neighbors began whispering about Karen's late-night patrols, about her obsession with our driveway, about how she never seemed to sleep. The paranoia she cast on us was bleeding back onto her. People wondered aloud, why was she so fixated? What did she stand to gain?
One humid night, as I sat on the back porch, I heard the rustle of leaves and the faint click of a pen. Peering over the fence, I caught sight of Karen again, scribbling notes while crouched near our backyard. I called out, "Karen, this is trespassing. Do you want me to call the police?" She stood, unbothered, her silhouette hallowed by the street lamp. "Go ahead. They'll be very interested in what I've found." And then she vanished into the dark. The war was no longer confined to bylaws and fines. It was spilling into our private lives, our reputations, even our safety. And as much as I hated to admit it, Karen was winning the battle of perception. All she needed was one more stunt, one more escalation to tip the scales completely. The question was, how far would she go? And how long before someone else finally turned against her?
The pounding on the door rattled the glass panes. Then came the command, "Police, open up!" That was the moment Karen thought she had won. Flashlights slashed across my living room curtains, blue strobes from a cruiser pulsing against the walls. I could see her across the street, perched at the edge of her driveway in her floral robe, arms crossed like she was the director of a play she had been rehearsing for months. Her smirk was sharp enough to cut glass. My wife Emily stood motionless beside me, her coffee mug still in hand, though it was nearly midnight. The knock came again, firmer this time, and I swear even the crickets in the yard went silent, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. But here's where Karen's plan unraveled, because Emily didn't flinch. She set her mug down with perfect calm, walked to the foyer, and unlatched the door. And when the officers asked to speak with the suspect, she simply reached into her bag and let her real federal badge gleam under the porch light. The looks on their faces? Priceless. Let's rewind 3 weeks. Karen had been circling us for months, but that particular stretch of summer is when she escalated. First came the whispers at the HOA meeting, anonymous concerns about a resident pretending to hold government authority. Then came the fake tip calls to local law enforcement, little nudges, like bait on a hook. I later learned the process. Municipal departments are obligated to log and review reports of impersonation. It doesn't matter if the caller's credibility is shaky, the claim has to be checked. Karen knew that, and she exploited it. She wrapped her vendetta in the cloak of civic duty. That night, when the patrol car rolled into Mulberry Lane, Karen practically skipped down her driveway to greet them. One officer told me later she waved them over like a hostess ushering guests to a dinner party. "She was very insistent," he admitted, "said you were dangerous." So when the knock came at our door, it wasn't random. It was Karen's opening night, the culmination of her paranoia. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted to see Emily dragged off in handcuffs, her fantasy of unmasking us finally realized. But let me tell you something, the law doesn't bend for neighborhood gossip. There are procedures, paperwork, probable cause. Officers don't just haul someone away because the HOA president says so. Still, the tension in that moment was real. The officers on our porch weren't actors in Karen's play, they were professionals responding to what they had been told was a felony report. One of them, a tall man with a weary face, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've received a call alleging you may be impersonating a federal officer. Do you have identification?" Emily didn't even hesitate. She reached into her work bag, pulled out her credentials, and placed them squarely in his hand. "You're welcome to call the agency to confirm." The silence that followed was thicker than the humidity in the air. The younger officer's flashlight wavered, then dropped to his side. Across the street, Karen leaned forward, squinting like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The older officer nodded respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am. That clears this up." He returned the badge, tipped his head, and the two of them stepped back toward the curb. And here's the kicker. Karen couldn't help herself. She marched across the street in her slippers, voice sharp.
Wait, that badge could be fake. Anyone can order one of those online. The officers froze. Emily and I exchanged a glance. I could see the vein pulsing in Karen's temple. Ma'am, she's presented federal ID. That's not something we dismiss lightly. Karen jabbed a finger toward our porch. You don't understand. She's been flashing it around the neighborhood. She threatened me at the mailboxes. That was a lie, and we all knew it. Emily never flaunted her badge. She hated drawing attention to it. But Karen said it with such conviction, you almost believed she was testifying under oath. At this point, neighbors had begun trickling out of their houses. Porch lights flicked on, curtains shifted. Mulberry Lane had turned into a stage, and Karen was screaming her lines to the whole audience. I stepped forward. Officers, this is harassment. Section 6.3 of our HOA bylaws require that complaints be signed and documented. Karen's been fabricating anonymous reports to weaponize the system. The older officer raised a hand. We can't enforce HOA bylaws, sir, but we can note that repeated false reports are subject to municipal penalties. He turned toward Karen. Ma'am, if you continue to call in unverified claims, that could become an issue. For the first time, Karen's expression faltered. Not much, just a crack in the armor, a twitch at the corner of her mouth. She sputtered, then regrouped. I'm only doing my duty to protect this neighborhood. The officers gave polite nods, then retreated to their cruiser. Engines hummed, lights flickered off, and just like that, the official part was over. But the neighborhood part? That was only beginning. Karen turned slowly, scanning the rows of watching eyes. You all saw that, didn't you? She's dangerous. Just wait until the truth comes out. Nobody answered. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, retreating into their homes. The silence was louder than any argument. Emily exhaled, her calm finally cracking. This is insane, she muttered to me as Karen stormed back to her porch. She's not going to stop. And she didn't. The very next morning, we received another violation notice, this one citing us for failure to maintain landscaping in accordance with community standards. Our lawn was trimmed, flowers in bloom, mulch fresh, but the fine was $75. It was punishment, plain and simple. At the board meeting that week, Karen doubled down. She announced she would be forming a security subcommittee to monitor unusual resident behavior. She even proposed buying a community surveillance system, with herself as the sole administrator. That's when the board finally hesitated. Frank, the one member with a backbone, spoke up. Karen, with all due respect, this is beyond the scope of our bylaws. We're not law enforcement. Karen shot back. If the board won't protect this neighborhood, then I will. Her voice cracked with conviction, and that's when I realized this wasn't about us anymore. Karen had rewritten the story in her head. She wasn't just trying to ruin Emily. She was casting herself as the lone defender of Mulberry Lane, battling shadowy enemies. Which raised the most dangerous question of all. What would she be willing to do next to prove she was right?
Order. This meeting will come to order. Karen's voice cracked as she smacked the gavel down on the wobbling card table. The room didn't fall silent. Instead, the whispers grew louder, buzzing like hornets stirred from a nest. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, neighbors shifting, arms crossed, lips pursed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow on Karen's flushed face. She was sweating, and she knew everyone was watching. You ever seen a ruler realize their throne isn't as sturdy as they thought? That was Karen, clutching her HOA binder like it was a life raft. Let me take you there. This was the quarterly HOA meeting, normally a dull affair where 5 bored neighbors argued about mulch or debated whether to raise dues by $3. But that night, you couldn't even find a parking spot near the clubhouse. People walked in from side streets, murmuring, trading half-whispered versions of the same story. Karen called the cops on Emily, and it blew up in her face. 3 weeks had passed since that spectacle on her lawn, but the neighborhood hadn't forgotten. By now, the details had warped into legend. Some said Karen accused Emily of running a fake FBI sting in the cul-de-sac. Others swore she'd tried to get the entire block evacuated. That's how gossip works. It grows legs, runs wild, and Karen couldn't catch it. The meeting began with routine items: landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, renewal of the security patrol contract. Karen tried to stick to the script, rattling off agenda items like a train conductor clinging to schedule. But the murmurs didn't stop. And every time she cleared her throat, I swear her voice carried less authority. Then came the agenda point everyone was waiting for: open forum. Frank, the board treasurer, didn't waste a second. He adjusted his glasses, leaned toward his microphone, and said, "Madam President, before residents speak, I believe the board should address the matter of credibility and governance, specifically the events of July 12th. That date hung heavy in the air. July 12th, the night of the flashing lights, the porch confrontation, the badge. Karen's head snapped toward Frank. That matter is closed. It's not HOA business. On the contrary, Frank replied, voice steady. Section 2.4 of our bylaws states board members must act in good faith without harassment or misuse of authority. Your actions, Karen, fall under scrutiny." The room erupted. Low gasps, a few scattered claps quickly shushed. Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. She banged the gavel again, too hard this time. "Order! That was a personal dispute, not a board matter." But here's the problem with running an HOA like your personal kingdom. Eventually, the subjects notice. One by one, neighbors stood. Mrs. Langley, who never spoke at meetings, lifted a trembling hand. "My grandchildren saw the police cars that night. They were frightened. All because of rumors." Her eyes darted toward Karen. Then came Tom, the guy with the immaculate lawn 2 doors down. "Karen, I've overlooked a lot. The fines, the inspections, but calling law enforcement on residents without cause, that crosses a line." The floodgates opened. People lined up behind the microphone, each airing their piece. Some complained about bogus violation notices, others about Karen's so-called security subcommittee, which had already sent residents creepy photos of their own driveways. Karen tried to stem the tide. "These complaints are exaggerated. I have always acted in the best interest of property values." But even as she spoke, I saw her hand trembling on the binder. And then Emily stood. The room went dead quiet. Every eye fixed on her, even Karen's, wide, wary, darting like a cornered animal. Emily's voice was calm, measured. "For the record, I never once used my position to intimidate anyone in this neighborhood. I was reported for impersonation. I showed the officers my credentials. That should have been the end of it." Karen shot to her feet. "Credentials that could be fake. Anyone can—" "Enough," Frank interrupted, slapping his palm on the table. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard. "Karen, you've crossed a line. This board has authority under Section 7.2 to call for a vote of no confidence. And tonight, with this many residents present, we can settle it." The air thickened. It wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a trial. Karen laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. This is my HOA. I built this community." And that's when someone from the back shouted, "No, Karen, you controlled it." The room rippled with agreement. The board conferred in hushed tones. Frank looked up. All in favor of proceeding with a no-confidence vote. 4 hands rose. Only Karen stayed down. And then the ballots appeared. Plain slips of paper, hastily passed down rows of folding chairs. Neighbors scribbled in silence, the scratch of pens loud as thunder. Karen sat rigid, eyes darting from face to face, trying to read intentions. I swear she mouthed words under her breath, counting allies, praying for numbers.
The slips were collected, stacked, tallied at the table. Every shuffle of paper seemed to echo in her chest. When the final count came, Frank cleared his throat. By a vote of 37-9, the board has determined a loss of confidence in President Karen Whitmore. Effective immediately, you are removed from office. The gasp that went through the room was electric. Chairs scraped, whispers swelled into chatter. Some people clapped, hesitant at first, then louder, bolder. Karen didn't move. She sat frozen, binder clutched to her chest like a shield. Her lips trembled. You'll regret this. All of you. You think this is over? It's not over. Her words slithered across the room, and for the first time all evening, a chill ran through me, because the look in her eyes wasn't defeat, it was resolve. Karen stood abruptly, the chair screeching back. She shoved through the aisle, robe brushing against knees, muttering curses under her breath. The door slammed behind her, rattling the frame. And though the meeting moved on, electing Frank as interim president, restoring calm, I couldn't shake the image of Karen's retreat. She hadn't lost gracefully. She had retreated to plot. And in that moment, a single thought haunted me. What does a dethroned queen do when the crown is ripped away, but her obsession with control is still burning?
Is this a federal notice? She whispered, her nails trembling as she held the thick envelope under the fluorescent glare of the HOA clubhouse. The seal glinted like a spotlight in a darkened theater. Every pair of eyes in that room turned toward Karen, waiting for her smirk, her sharp retort, her usual counterattack. But for once, she had none. Now let me back up, because you're probably wondering how we got there. The night she called the cops on my wife should have been her crowning victory. Instead, it planted the seed of her undoing. Karen had weaponized authority one too many times, and the neighborhood had grown weary of her act. You could see it in the way people started to roll their eyes at her violations, the way whispers followed her when she strutted across the cul-de-sac with her clipboard. But even so, she wasn't done. She doubled down. She pushed harder. And that's when I knew it was time to escalate too. You see, in HOA politics, perception is everything. Karen's power didn't come from bylaws or municipal codes alone. It came from fear. She controlled the narrative, convinced people she was untouchable. So the only way to topple her was to flip that perception, make her look small, powerless, laughable. And nothing, I mean nothing, crumbles a bully faster than an official seal they can't explain away. 3 weeks earlier, the plan began to take shape. I filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. Yes, that's a real thing. HOAs are corporations, after all, bound by state law. They're required to follow proper procedure, open meetings, transparent budgets, fair enforcement of rules. Karen? She'd been cutting corners, holding executive sessions without notice, approving fines without board votes, even tapping HOA funds to pay for what she called administrative refreshments. Translation, her private wine stash. I had the receipts. Bank statements leaked by a disillusioned treasurer. Screenshots of emails where she bullied dissenting board members. Copies of violation notices she'd issued that never made it into the official minutes. To anyone else, it might look like neighborhood gossip. But to a state investigator, it looked like a pattern of abuse. And here's the twist. The letter that arrived wasn't from me. It was from them. A real state compliance officer responding to my complaint, demanding an audit of the HOA's practices. The envelope bore the state seal, crisp and undeniable. But the way it was delivered, that was all me. I could have slipped it into her mailbox, quiet and unnoticed. Instead, I arranged for the notice to be presented at the very next HOA meeting. Picture the scene. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, folding chairs scraping linoleum, whispers buzzing like hornets. Karen presided at the head of the table, fanning herself with the agenda. She thought this was business as usual.
She had no idea the script was about to flip. When the envelope was handed to her, she laughed at first. "More nonsense mail," she said, loud enough for the back row to hear. But then her eyes caught the seal. Her laugh stuck in her throat. She pulled her reading glasses from her blouse pocket, slipped them on, and the room went silent. Her lips moved as she scanned the first line. "Pursuant to state statute, section 421.3, your association is hereby notified." That was it. She froze. No smirk, no quip, just silence. Now don't misunderstand me. This wasn't a federal raid, no handcuffs, no sirens, just paperwork. Dry, procedural, bureaucratic paperwork. But in the world of HOA power, paperwork is everything. One envelope carried more weight than all her petty violation slips combined. It was the one thing she couldn't bully, couldn't shout down, couldn't control. "Karen?" one neighbor asked softly. Is everything all right?" She tried to swallow, but her voice cracked. This is a misunderstanding. It's formality." But no one believed her. You could feel the shift in the room. For months, maybe years, Karen had held herself above everyone else. Now, with that seal in her hands, she looked small, exposed, like the emperor with no clothes. And then came the escalation. She lashed out. "This is sabotage," she shouted, slamming the envelope on the table. "Someone is trying to smear me. You know who you are." Her eyes darted across the crowd, scanning faces, desperate to pin the blame. But nobody spoke, not a word. Even her usual allies, the board members she'd cowed into submission, stayed quiet. That was the moment I knew we had her. Earlier that week, I'd slipped a copy of the bylaws under every neighbor's door. Highlighted sections, circled clauses. Most people never read those things, but now they had. They knew Karen had overstepped. They knew she had violated open meeting laws, mishandled funds, and issued fines without due process. And with the state breathing down her neck, she couldn't hide it anymore. Still, Karen wasn't about to surrender quietly. After the meeting adjourned, she cornered me by the coffee urn. "You think you're clever," she hissed, her red nails tapping the styrofoam cup. "I don't flinch, Karen. It wasn't me. It was the state. You brought this on yourself." Her jaw tightened. For once, she didn't have a comeback. Just a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The next week, the fallout began. A state compliance officer scheduled an on-site review. The HOA had to produce meeting minutes, financial reports, even copies of violation notices. For once, Karen couldn't stonewall. Every missing receipt, every undocumented fine, every backroom decision, it all spilled out under the sterile light of oversight. Neighbors who once cowered before her were suddenly emboldened. They spoke up. They asked questions. They demanded accountability. And Karen, she shrank. She showed up late to meetings, her hair unbrushed, her blouse wrinkled. The confidence was gone. She was still president, technically, but the crown had slipped. Each new question chipped at her armor. Each missing document tightened the noose. Do you see it now? The beauty of revenge isn't in the explosion. It's in the slow unraveling. It's in watching someone who built their power on intimidation crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. That night, when the envelope first landed in her hands, I leaned back in my chair and watched the transformation. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, reduced to a trembling homeowner with no defense but bluster. It was almost poetic. But don't think for a second that was the end. If anything, it was just the beginning. Karen wasn't finished. She still had tricks left, desperate plays she thought might save her. And as you'll see, the most dangerous Karen is the one backed into a corner. Because when her authority slipped, she didn't go quietly. She went feral. And that's when things truly got out of hand.